You're listening to an African Elements top news story for July 18th, 2025. Please visit our website at africanelements.org for more daily news. Hankison Sentencing, Breonna Taylor's Legacy, by Darius Spearman, African Elements. The recent recommendation by the United States Department of Justice, DOJ, for a one-day prison sentence for former Louisville police officer Brett Hankison has ignited a firestorm of controversy and grief within the African American community. This suggestion comes after Hankison's conviction for violating Breonna Taylor's civil rights during a raid in March 2020 that tragically led to her death. It compels African Americans to reflect on police accountability and the pursuit of justice for victims of excessive force. The recommendation underscores a persistent and painful narrative in our community: the struggle for meaningful consequences when law enforcement abuses its power. Breonna Taylor's case is not an isolated incident. It is a vivid example of the challenges Black communities face in obtaining justice. Her name has become a symbol alongside George Floyd's, igniting widespread protests and calls for police reform. The DOJ's rationale for the lenient sentence, stating that Hankison did not shoot Taylor and is not responsible for her death, feels like a direct affront to the pain and suffering experienced by her family and many others. This stance appears to minimize the gravity of firing shots into an occupied home, an act that undeniably contributed to the chaotic and ultimately fatal events of that night. Breonna Taylor's life was tragically cut short on March 13, 2020, during a flawed, no-knock raid on her apartment. Police officers forced their way into her home, leading to a confrontation where Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, fearing intruders, fired a warning shot. Officers returned fire, killing Taylor. The raid was part of a drug investigation, though Taylor herself was not a suspect. This detail is crucial. It underscores how often innocent Black lives are caught in the crossfire of aggressive policing tactics. The police employed a no-knock warrant, a controversial tool that permits officers to enter a premises without announcing their presence. This type of warrant has faced significant criticism for increasing the likelihood of violent encounters and raising questions about its legality. For many in the African American community, the use of such warrants evokes a deep sense of vulnerability and fear, reflecting a history of state-sanctioned violence against Black bodies. The events of that night and the subsequent legal proceedings have continuously highlighted systemic issues within policing and the profound racial disparities that persist. Brett Hankison faced federal charges due to his actions during the raid, specifically being convicted of violating civil rights by firing shots into Taylor's home. This conviction stands in contrast to his earlier acquittal on state charges. This disparity in outcomes between state and federal prosecutions often leaves the Black community feeling disillusioned. It reinforces the perception that state-level systems offer less accountability for police misconduct. The federal conviction, however, does provide a measure of accountability, recognizing that Hankison's actions during the raid were unlawful. The conviction stemmed from the use of excessive force, where his firing of shots into the apartment was deemed a civil rights violation. A civil rights violation, particularly in law enforcement, usually entails actions like using excessive force or depriving individuals of their rights while acting under official authority. Such violations are prosecutable under federal law, specifically 18 U.S.C. Section 242, which prohibits official acts that infringe upon an individual's constitutional rights. Still, the recommended one-day sentence, despite a maximum possible sentence of life in prison, raises serious questions about the value placed on Black lives within the justice system. The Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice plays a critical role in enforcing federal civil rights laws, including those related to police misconduct. This division investigates and prosecutes cases involving such violations. Their involvement in cases like Breonna Taylor's is meant to ensure law enforcement agencies adhere to federal civil rights laws. However, when their recommendations appear to fall short of community expectations for justice, it erodes trust and deepens the sense of betrayal among those perpetually fighting for their rights. The recommendation has been met with profound disappointment and outrage, especially from Breonna Taylor's mother, who described herself as heartbroken and angry, viewing it as a blatant betrayal of the jury's decision. The Legal Defense Fund, LDF, a historic civil rights organization deeply rooted in the fight for justice, also condemned the DOJ's recommendation. They advocate for more substantial accountability, reflecting the community's demand for meaningful consequences for such actions. For the African American community, this is not just about one case. It is about the broader pattern of minimal consequences for law enforcement who inflict harm. The LDF's stance aligns with a wider call for stronger accountability in policing and advocates for significant legal repercussions. Substantial accountability means ensuring that those responsible face consequences that truly address the violations and also prevent future abuses. The stark contrast between the maximum penalty of life in prison for Hankison's conviction and the one-day sentence recommended by the DOJ highlights a systemic issue that continues to plague our justice system when it involves police misconduct against Black individuals. A federal judge will make the final decision on Hankison's sentence, and they possess significant discretion considering various factors including victim impact statements and legal precedents. The case of Breonna Taylor, even years later, remains a critical touchstone in the ongoing fight for police reform and racial justice. It continues to influence discussions around systemic issues in law enforcement and contributes to movements like Say Her Name. The protests sparked by her death alongside George Floyd's highlighted the urgency of addressing patterns of police misconduct and the need for meaningful change across the United States. Recent trends in police accountability, such as increased scrutiny through pattern or practice investigations by the DOJ and the establishment of civilian review boards, show a glimmer of progress. However, cases like Hankison's, where accountability seems to fall short, remind us how much further we must go. The trajectory of justice in this case, from the no-knock warrant that led to tragedy to the current one-day sentencing recommendation, illustrates the deeply ingrained challenges faced by the African American community in seeking dignity and equity within the legal system. Our collective memory demands that we recognize the profound impact Breonna Taylor's death has had and continues to have on the national conversation about justice and equality. Copyright African Elements.